Hi, I'm Glyn Dewis and welcome to episode 8 of my video podcast. Okay, so what I thought we'd do for this particular episode is just concentrate on one area of retouching, and that's going to be dodging and burning. Now, if you've seen any of the other videos on my YouTube channel, you'll probably see that I have covered dodging and burning to some degree on a couple of those there. But for this video, what I want to do is just dive in just a little bit deeper to show you some of the hows and whys and whatnots to do with dodging and burning. So we're going to use the dodge and burn tools that are built into Photoshop. I want to first of all show you the way that I don't do it, and then I want to show you the way that I do it. And in the second part of the video, I want to show you kind of like a super fast way that you can do some dodge and burning as well. Okay, so here is how I don't do it. Now, Photoshop itself is kind of designed so that we can dodge and burn directly onto our pictures. So what I'll do is I'm going to create a copy of my background layer, and I'm going to come to the dodge tool over on the left hand side here in my toolbar. So obviously in the drop down menu here we've got the dodge tool, the burn tool and the sponge tool. So we're only going to concentrate on the dodge and the burn tool, and they've got a keyboard shortcut of O. Now I'm only going to use the dodge tool. And at the top here we get the options that appear when we do select that, and we've got range where we can choose from shadows, midtones or highlights, and I generally leave it around the midtones. Exposure we can go from 0 all the way up to 100, but I'm going to keep this nice and low, and just so you can see things on the screen I'm going to keep it to around about 10%. And the reason I'm going to keep it nice and low is that this is one of those techniques where you want to do a little bit and then build up, just build slowly up, because very quickly you can find that you've done too much. So I think if you start off with a small amount and just build it up over time, that'll help for you to get the desired kind of look without going way overboard. Now there's also a little tick box up here that's called Protect Tones. Now that was introduced to Photoshop going back a few versions now, and what that does is in the old versions when we used to do dodging and burning directly on our pictures, if we did too much, or actually very soon having done some dodging and burning, you'd start to see artifacts and colour breaking down, all that kind of stuff. So this little Protect Tones little box at the top of the screen here is something that Adobe introduced which kind of combats that, so we can do a little bit more on our picture without starting to see the damage coming in. However, here's how we do it. So we've got our picture and I'm going to use the dodge tool, and basically the kind of premise behind dodging and burning is that we're going to brighten highlights and we're going to darken shadows, and by doing that we can add a lot more interest and contour and dimension to our pictures. So to give you an idea then, I'm just going to quickly come in and I'm going to, with my dodge tool, I'm going to add a bit of a highlight going down his nose and a highlight in the forehead as well. Now if I wanted to jump over to the burn tool, what I don't need to do is keep coming over to the toolbar and selecting the burn tool itself from there. What I can do is just stay with the dodge tool and hold down my option key, and that automatically flips me over to use the opposite tool. So if I'm using the dodge tool, if I hold down my option key, it jumps over to the burn tool. And the great thing is the settings remain exactly the same at the top. So it stays in midtones and stays at 10%. So that's really handy. So let's just burn down the eyebrows a bit. So I'm holding down my option key and just a few strokes on the eyebrows. I'm also going to add a bit of a shadow going down either side of his nose. So we'll darken down that, and I'll just paint in just a little bit darkening on the contours of his face where there are shadow areas. So where I added the highlight in the middle of his forehead here, I'm just going to darken down either side so it kind of exaggerates that, and just burning down his hair. Now this is how I guess Adobe would have expected that we would do the dodging and burning. And that's all well and good, but there is a big disadvantage to doing it this way. And that is that, well, it's destructive, because now we can't kind of like make any adjustments to it. So what happens if I want to ease off just a little bit on a particular area that I've dodged and burned? I can't do it. What happens if I want to blend in where I've painted a highlight and a shadow together? I can't do that. It's not very flexible. So although I'm not saying this is a wrong way to do dodging and burning, because you'll probably find that this would do you generally. However, what I want to show you is a very flexible way of doing dodging and burning, and also something that's close to my heart is working non-destructive, because when you do it this way, obviously we're creating a copy of our layer which is going to increase our file size and all that kind of stuff. So here's how I'm actually doing it for real now. So let's just get rid of this copy. What I'm going to do is create a blank layer, and I'm going to fill that with 50% grey. So I'll go to the edit menu, choose fill, and choose 50% grey from the contents. And when I'm dodging and burning, generally I will use soft light. I used to kind of just use the soft light blend mode on one layer to do the skin, and then I would choose overlay on another grey layer to do the clothing. But generally now I'm just kind of sticking with soft light. So now then, I'm still going to be using my dodge tool. And I'm going to come in and do exactly the same thing. So I'm going to darken down the eyebrows. I had a highlight down his nose, a highlight on his forehead, and all this kind of stuff. So I could spend ages doing this now. Darkening down his hairline. Whoop, let's just do that. So I'm holding down my option key, like I said. Although I'm in the dodge tool, when I hold down the option key, I'm flipping over to the burn tool. So I'm just going to darken down certain areas, had highlights in others. So I'm just going to do a little bit to show the advantage as to why I would do this on the grey layer, and why it's actually better to do this than doing it on the original pitch like I've just done just a few moments ago. So I'll just do a little bit more on here, like so. Highlight on his lip there, and we'll just define these lips just like that, and maybe just down, actually darken down a little bit of stubble to make that stand out a little bit more, something like that. In fact, we could also maybe add some extra creases in his clothing. So really, when we look at this is a flat picture. The only reason we can kind of see these creases is because there's highlights and shadows. So if we wanted to exaggerate that or make our own, all we need to do is add in highlights and shadows. So for example, let's say I wanted to add a crease on this part here. I'm with my dodge tool, I'm going to add a bit of a highlight there, and on either side of that highlight I'm going to do some burning. So one burn there and a bit of a burn there. So if I turn that on and off now, can you see how that's added a crease? So that's what we can do. We can really start to shape and add dimension, all this kind of stuff. So for now then, you're probably thinking, well, what's the advantage of doing this on a grey layer? Well, this is the advantage. Let's just turn off the background layer now so we can just see what we've done. So this is the result of our dodging and burning. Now the great thing here is, if I wanted to, say, blend in these areas just a little bit better, because there was a very obvious highlight and shadow, and that's some of the areas that people can go wrong when they do dodging and burning, is that the areas that they paint in are way too defined, and they don't kind of bleed in and fade in naturally to each other to give them that more realistic look. But what we can do now on a grey layer is to actually help the dodging and burning to blend into each other, so it does look much more realistic. So all I need to do, let's just say I wanted this crease here that we painted onto our picture, I wanted that there to blend into each other just so it looks a bit more realistic. All I'd need to do is get my lasso tool, make a selection going around it. So I'm telling Photoshop now, only look within the actual marching ants. So it's only going to work on this area here that I've actually put the surround of these marching ants around. Go to filter, blur and Gaussian blur, and then I can control how much I want it to blend into each other by how far up I bring the radius on the slider. So that's way too much, but just bring it down just a little bit so it kind of softens it. So you can see if I just click in the dialog box here on and off, you can see that blurring is helping the highlights and the shadows to bleed into each other. So that's going to really help the dodging and burning to be much more realistic. But another thing is, what I can also do is, if I wanted to maybe reduce it in certain areas, like maybe the darkening part on the forehead is a bit too much here, what I can do is come over to my palette on the left hand side in my colour palette, click on the foreground colour, and I can choose a grey colour. Now if I'm using black or white, I'm going to have these hue, saturation and brightness levels here. Mine's at black at the minute because it says 0 in all of those areas. So if I just change the brightness to 50, the colour in the top here now is the new colour I've assigned, and that's a 50% grey. And that's exactly the same colour as what I've been doing the dodging and burning on. So now what I can do is I can get a brush, and I'm painting with this 50% grey, and then I can either come in and completely remove areas, like I have just there, or maybe if I didn't want to reduce it or get rid of it completely, what I could do, rather than painting with this brush at 100% opacity, let's just say I wanted to maybe half the actual effect here. So I could paint with the brush at 50% and then paint over it. So it's not completely gone, but it is kind of still there, but not so kind of impactful. It's not quite so strong. So that's the reason that I do the dodging and burning on a 50% grey layer. And obviously another advantage is this is only a 50% grey layer. There's nothing much else on there. So although it's going to increase the file size a little bit, it's going to be nowhere near as if I'd actually increased the background layer that has had all that retouching done onto it. So that's just one part of dodging and burning that I want to cover. I also want to cover just a little bit of how we can do it to create muscles, because obviously anybody who follows what I do, they know that I tend to do a lot of physique and bodybuilding kind of photographs and body retouching and stuff. So I want to show you a little bit of dodging and burning on a physique picture. Actually, before I go though, let's just flatten this. This tie here, I've never been happy with this tie. Whenever I did this photo shoot, also afterwards, once I'd edited it, it was one of those things when I'd rushed and the tie was a little bit off centre. So let's just see if I can just move that across there. So let's just create a duplicate of this picture here. And I'll create a copy. And all I'll do is I'm just going to get my lasso tool and make a very, very rough selection around the tie. Now, if I'd have been clever, when I first did this retouching way back, I'd have noticed this at the start and I'd have done this then. But just to give you a quick idea of how I can actually do that. So, selected the tie, I'll go to Edit, Transform and Warp. And all I want to do is just kind of bring it over just a little bit because it's way over to one side. So, I can use the Warp now to, in fact, let's just go back just a fraction. Let's just come out of there. I'm going to select, modify and feather. Whenever I've got the selection on here, definitely want to add some feather, so wherever I move it to, it blends in with the shirt that I'm moving it around, so you can't really see where I've moved it, where the joins are. So 10, I'll go to 15 radius there, so click OK. Then I'm going to go to transform and warp. So now I'm going to come in, I'm going to move these around, just clicking on these handles. I'm not going to do too much, but I just wanted to bring it so it wasn't quite so over to one side. Something like, let's just move those around, something like that. Drag this back bottom out just a little bit, let's push that little bit in, and I can come to the top here and I can adjust using these handles here so that the actual collar lines up as well, like so, something like that, and move that bit just a little bit more. So you get the idea. I'm just doing this quickly to give you an idea of how you can move it around. And obviously if there was any areas that you didn't think blended in too well, like maybe here, this part of the shirt, I could just add a layer mask, get a black brush and make it nice and small and just kind of paint that area just back in there. So, whoops, a bit too far, so it kind of blends in just a little bit more. But that's not really what I wanted to cover in this. It's just a little extra little thing there. So okay, quick break and then I'll show you the body sort of dodging and burning to bring out muscle definition. Hey folks, just want to take a few moments of your time to let you know of a couple of things. The first one is my Dynamic Duo Knockout Workshop coming to Halifax in the UK on the weekend of the 21st and 22nd of September. Now if you go to my website and click on the workshops link, or on the right hand side of the menu bar, you'll get a description of exactly what this 2-day workshop includes. The first day we're going to be on location at the Halifax Boxing Gym, photographing professional boxers, physique athletes, models, doing all kinds of stuff, all kinds of setups, setting up the lighting from scratch and taking you through the whole process. So that's a full hands-on day of photography. And day 2 is we're going to be all sat down on computers retouching all of the pictures, and that's where I'll show you absolutely all the techniques that I would use in the kind of pictures that you see on screen now. No secrets, everything out there. So that's on the 21st, 22nd of September. Prices are £249 per person. That includes lunch and transport to and from hotels on both days. Hope to see you there. The next thing is my newsletter. Now, anybody who's signed up to the newsletter, you won't have received one for a while, but we're now going to be kicking them off again because things have been quite busy. So if you get to my website, there's a link at the top saying newsletter, and this is where I'm going to keep you informed of everything new that's been coming out, everything that's been happening. So you're going to get to know about training that's coming out well in advance, and plus if you're subscribed to the newsletter, you're going to get discounts as well. So one thing I'm not going to do with the newsletter is bombard you. I don't know about you, but I hate having newsletters come through sort of every week or every couple of days. Can't stand that. It'll be maybe once a month and just occasionally within that month when we've got something special happening as well. So there's two things there, the workshop and the newsletter. Okay, so carrying on from where we left off, I now want to show you how dodging and burning can help to really enhance the muscles in any physique shots that you happen to do. And I'm going to do it on this picture here that I've got of a friend of mine, a guy called Steve Cook, who's actually I think he's #1 in the UK and #2 in the world when it comes to kickboxing. So I'm going to have to kind of give a bit of a disclaimer here when I use Steve's picture, because when we did this photo shoot, he was what we call off season, so he wasn't in fight condition, so we kind of had to add in some muscles on him, like just around about here. Now I know Steve has just done a fight just a few days before this particular video has gone out, and I know he was in top shape, so hopefully I've rode myself out of that enough, because Steve's what we call hard as nails, and the last thing I want to do is upset him. But just to give you an idea of how we can use dodging and burning to enhance muscles, let's just quickly look at it. Now, as a side note, excuse me, I nearly swallowed a fly then. As a side note, this tutorial, taking this original picture here from out of camera all the way to the final picture, is going to be a future issue. It's going to be in a future issue of Practical Photoshop magazine. Now we're in July, just about to come to August, and I think it's going to be September or October of this year, 2013. So I'll probably keep you updated either here or on my website as to when that's going to be, because it's going to be I think you can find the workflow really interesting, because it's fast for one thing, which is great, and also completely non-destructive. So just going back to the dodging and burning, then I can go into any of the layers here, make changes, and the one I want to work on is the dodge and burn tool, sorry, dodge and burn layer, because this is all non-destructive here. I can do that, and we can see when I turn that on and off, you can see what we've done to his abdominal area here and a little bit on his chest as well. So what I'm going to do then, I'm going to turn that layer off. And let's turn all these other layers off actually just above it, so we can just go down to the bare picture just here. So I'm going to add in a blank layer like I've shown already, fill that with 50% grey and change the blend mode to soft light. Then I'm going to get my dodge tool from over in the left hand on the toolbar here, range set to mid-tones, exposure 10%. And all I'm going to do is, using the dodge tool, I'm going to brighten areas. So generally anywhere that's brighter is coming towards the screen, anywhere that's darker is going away. So that helps to give that element of depth and dimension. So I'm just increasing the brightness on the 6-pack, and in between those areas I'm adding in some burning. So it kind of helps to define those muscle groups just a little bit more. Now you'll notice when you're doing your dodging and burning, one thing I didn't mention earlier was that when you're first doing it, you can't actually see much of what you're doing. You kind of think, well, it's having a little bit of effect, but you don't really see the full effect. But it's not until you go away from what you've done, come back to it, that you start to see exactly the effect you have. And the danger behind all that is that you can go overboard, like I did say earlier on. So advice when you're doing your dodging and burning is do it in stages, then come back to it. So I've only just done a few seconds worth there. But you can already see when I turn that layer on and off how we're helping to make those abdominals become much, much more defined. I could also add some dodging onto his chest area just to brighten it up in the middle of his pecs, and then darken down the central area and just a little bit of a curve to help the chest seem like it's coming out towards you just that much more, and gives it a much more thicker, fuller muscle kind of feel to it. So let's turn that on and off like so. Now we can also add in some obliques. Got to be careful when we do these, just a smaller brush, and I'm going to add in a little bit of a highlight there and there. And then just darken it down either side, something like that. I remember when I did this originally, you have to be really careful doing these obliques, because you can go overboard. So there, a little bit more on there, brighten and darken, something like that. As an example, I mean, I'm going through this pretty quickly, but this is an advantage now. You can see why we're doing that 50% grey layer, because I'm happy with the abdominals, but the obliques, they don't blend in all that well together. So I can turn every layer off by holding down my option key, clicking on the eye icon, or just beneath the eye icon in the dodge and burn layer, just so I see this grey layer. This is what you can see. This is the effect of the dodging and burning. So I want these obliques here to blend in just a little bit better. So I get my lasso tool, make a selection of those, just that area there. So Photoshop's only looking within that area. Go to Filter, Blur, Gaussian Blur, and I can use the radius here like I did before, just to help them to blend in just a little bit like so. We'll go for around about 12, be fine. Click OK, deselect, and then go back to the picture, zoom out. And now we can see that those things are starting to blend in just a little bit more. But it isn't one of those things that you can rush, but you can see that very quickly you can start to make a bit of a difference. Okay, so I thought I'd finish off with a third technique, which is another way that we can enhance highlights and darken down shadows, which is really what we're doing when we're doing dodging and burning. And this technique is one that sometimes I just use on its own, and sometimes I actually do in the final part of the retouching my pictures, in that bit when I have a little bit of a playtime to experiment and see what else I can do. It's a really, really fast technique, and it makes use of channels. So here's how we do it. Okay, so here's my finished picture, if you like, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the channels over in the right hand side here, and when we've got the RGB here, I'm going to hold down my command key or my control key depending on what I'm working on. I'm holding down my command key and I'm going to click on the RGB thumbnail, and when I do that you'll see these marching ants appear. Now, to keep things in the simplest terms, basically what I asked Photoshop to do here is to select the lighter parts of my picture. So those are now selected. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go to layer, new, and layer via copy, which has got that keyboard shortcut we generally all know, Command or Control J. So now I've done that, I'll go back to my layers, and if I turn off what I've just the bottom layer here, you'll be able to see what I've just done. So hopefully that's shown up on your screen here. I've selected the lighter parts of my picture. So let's turn on that background layer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this layer here to screen. And you'll see why in a moment, because we're going to use blend modes. The next thing I'm going to do is click back on the background layer, go back over to my channels, and again hold down my command key and click on the thumbnail of the RGB. Now we know, because we've just done it, that when I first do that, that's selecting the lighter parts of the picture. I now want to select the darker parts. So all I need to do is ask it to select the opposite of what it is already doing. So I'm going to go to select and inverse. So now it's selecting the dark parts. So I'll put those onto their own layer by going layer, new, and layer via copy, or using that Command or Control J. Go back to the layers channel here, layers palette, and if I turn everything off, you'll be able to see that now we can see the dark parts of the picture. And I'm going to rename that layer to multiply. Okay, so here's what we do. Now that I've got these two light parts and the dark parts, the multiply layer I'm going to change to multiply blend mode, and the screen I'm going to change to the screen blend mode. Now then what I'm going to do is, it's more a case of personal choice and taste here, but I think the darks are maybe too dark, so I'm going to lower the opacity of that layer down to around about maybe 30%, something like that. Now at the moment this effect is on all of the picture, so you can see if I turn it on and off, the whole picture, not just Mehmet, which is our bodybuilder friend here, but also on the background, but I only want it to be on Mehmet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to now hold down my shift key and click on the uppermost layer, so the screen and the multiply layers are selected. Go to the flyout menu at the top of the layers panel, new group from layers, and we'll call that D and B, dodge and burn, and click OK. Then I'm going to add a layer mask to this group here to hide the effect, so that I can then paint it in where I want it. So at the bottom of the layers panel, we've got the layer mask icon, which is the third one from the right. Now if I just click on that, ordinarily it adds a white layer mask. But if I could obviously change that to black by doing select and inverse and what have you. But if I hold down my option key and click on the layer mask, it automatically gives me a black mask. So now the effect has been hidden. To reveal the effect only on Mehmet, I'm going to get a brush, a white brush, 100% opacity, and start painting it in. And you'll see that effect now starts to come in. Obviously I'm doing this quickly, so I may go over the edges just a little bit, but you're going to get an idea of how this effect works. And I do love this one because it is really, really quick and gives you a lot of control as well. Okay, so just zooming in then. And like to there, so you can see Mehmet nice and close. So be able to see now that the highlights have been brightened, the shadow and midtone has been darkened, and it adds a little bit more contour to the picture. So I'll turn it on and off. You can see the kind of effect that's having there. So that's almost like another way that we can do some kind of like a dodge and burning effect. And just like in Photoshop, there are so many ways to do it, but this is just another way or another technique that you can add to your Photoshop toolbox. Okay, so thanks for tuning in to this particular episode. And like I mentioned, don't forget to sign up to the newsletter so that you get to know about any trainings that are coming out well in advance, plus any discounts. So there's a newsletter to sign up for. And make sure as well that you subscribe to this channel by clicking on the link, which is probably around about here
on the screen right now. Now in the future episodes, if there's anything that you'd like to see, by all means just drop me a line to glyn@glyndewis.com. Any tips, tricks or techniques, or maybe if you just got any questions or comments, again just drop me a line and I'll get round to answering them as soon as I can. Okay, thanks for tuning in and I'll see you next time.